This is September 22nd. Joe Todd, an interview with Nettie B Lewis. Okay. Miss Lewis, where were you born?
I was born near Stonewall, Oklahoma. It then was known as Indian Territory, the land of the Chickasaw Indians.
And when's your birthday?
It's December 14, 1896.
1896. Who is your father?
John Edward Lewis.
Where was he from?
He was a native of Texas. His father and his family moved from North Carolina in a covered wagon. I don't know what year they moved there. My father was born in Texas. My grandfather had righted 640 acres of land 17 miles south of Dallas. My father was born there and grew up there. After his mother died, he came to Oklahoma. He'd heard of Oklahoma.
What year did he come to Oklahoma?
I do not know definitely.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I suspect, around 1890s, somewhere around in there.
What was your mother's name?
My mother was Margaret Stanford Lewis. Her maiden name was Stanford.
Was she from Texas also?
No, she was a native of Arkansas. Her father was born in Alabama.
Were either of your grandfathers in the Civil War?
Yes, my mother's father was. He was injured in the Civil War.
Did you know him?
No, he died long before I was born.
Yeah.
I knew nothing of my grandparents except one grandmother, my mother's mother.
Mm-hmm. She was born in Alabama.
No, the father was born in Alabama. She was born in Arkansas.
Arkansas.
The grandmother was.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
When did your mother come to Indian Territory?
I frankly don't know. I really don't know that question.
Hey, can you describe Stonewall? What the town looked like as a child?
As a child, I don't remember much about it because we left there when I was 5 years old. But the Stonewall that I knew is now known as Old Stonewall and was renamed Frisco. The town Stonewall then moved to the east about 6 miles. It was a typical country town, small.
Mm-hmm. What was the population?
Oh, when we first lived there?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I would guess less than 100. That's a guess.
Who was it named for, Stonewall?
I do not know. I do not know. I've always assumed probably it was Stonewall Jackson, but I don't know.
You moved when you were 5 years old.
My father died when I was 3.5 years old. And my mother had a bachelor brother who never married. And I was reared by my mother and this bachelor uncle. She bought a farm that touches the town side of Newalla, this little town down here.
Newalla.
You know where it is?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, she bought a farm that joins that town site on the west. Mm-hmm. And I grew up there until I was 15. And then we moved to Edmond, and I entered Central State College then.
Where did you start school?
When did I start school?
Yes, ma'am.
When I was 6 years old.
And where was that? In
That was in the little town of Newalla.
Newalla. Really,
before it was established,
right.
To tell the truth. The railroad, the A&A Railroad, ran through there about 1904. And it was named Newalla.
How did you travel from Stonewall to Newalla?
Covered wagon. We moved in a covered wagon.
Do you remember the trip?
Yes, quite well.
Tell me about it.
I believe there were 3 wagon loads, and they were covered wagons, and we camped along the way. I don't remember how many days it took us. I think almost a week to move from Stonewall to this place, and it's about 80 miles, I think. But those were the days of wagon ruts, not the days of ribbons of pavement as we have now. There's been a vast difference in transportation since we moved there.
How about crossing the rivers?
As I remember, the creeks were forded and there were bridges on the main rivers when we moved there, as I remember it.
What kind of wagon did you have? Remember the brand name of it?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I do not.
How many were in the party in the 3 wagons?
I believe all told, not more than 7. I think there were 3 wagons, and there were 3, I think, who brought the cattle through.
How many head of
They
cattle?
moved. I don't remember just how many had, but they moved some cattle.
Okay. How many?
And they drove them.
Yeah. How many were in your family at that time?
My mother and uncle, grandmother, and me. Never more than 4, as I remember, in a family.
What about sleeping accommodations on the trip?
For the most part, we slept in the wagons.
So you brought everything with you, all your furniture? And
Brought the
everything?
furniture, yes. As the old saying is, lock, stock, and barrel type of moving. And moved to the farm. The reason of our moving, there were no schools in Indian Territory. And I've often been told this story. The day I was born, my father said, well, we've got to move. So after his death, she found this place up here and moved to it. We were within a half mile of the schoolhouse. I had a great build-up about starting to school. I thought it would be wonderful that I'd go to school. That's all I'd heard. I went one day and liked it well. The next morning I said, no, I didn't want to go back. I'd had enough of it. From then on, I was forced to go to school.
What was the name of the school?
It was called Halifax at that time because there was a little store there before the railroad went in. There was a little store. And the store was called Halifax. So, of course, the school was called Halifax School.
And where did the name Newalla come from?
I do not know. The railroad, I think, did that.
Okay. When you moved to the Newalla area, what kind of house did you live in?
We had a 3-room house. And we had one of the old-fashioned dugouts. I don't know, I doubt that you've ever seen one. The dugout was the first thing that was built on the farm. See, it was not inhabited until 89, and we moved in 1900. And there was the first thing that was on the place was a good-sized dugout in which the people who homesteaded it, I think they called it homestead instead of head riding. The man who homesteaded it had built this good-sized dugout. They were down about 3 steps, and then it wasn't very tall, of course. Then we had 3-room house that was built later.
Was it a frame house?
It was a frame house. The old house is still there. The dugout is gone long ago.
What kind of chores did you do around the house?
Very little. Very little. I wasn't made to do it.
And was your uncle a farmer?
Yes.
Did you help around the farm any?
No, I didn't. We left there when I was 15. So very little I had to do with it.
Do you remember Statehood Day?
Yes, I do.
Tell me about that day.
I remember very little about it. I quite well remember when I heard about it. It was in the afternoon, and I think probably we heard through the newspaper. At that time, there were no telephones down in there. And I remember they said, well, today, Mr. Oklahoma and Miss Indian Territory joined. And it became Oklahoma. And it was in the afternoon. I remember that much about it, thinking, well, we're living a state now.
Was there a big celebration?
No, not down there, there wasn't. I do not know. There probably was here, but not down there.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, that 25 miles off down there was a long way. We could faintly see the lights of Oklahoma City from that distance. And today, it's in the city limits. That's how much Oklahoma City has grown in time.
Who had the first car in Newalla?
I don't know. I don't remember.
You
I don't
remember-
think there was one there. I don't believe there was one there when we left there in 1912. We moved in 1912. And I don't believe there was a car in there. I remember the first car I saw.
Where was that?
We used to go to Shawnee. And of course they went in the wagon. My uncle went down after a load of feed for the cows. And I remember meeting the first automobile I ever saw on those paths, you might say, that we call roads. I remember how hard it was to try to get out of the road to let the automobile by. No paving, whatever.
So you met your first car on the way to Shawnee.
That's right.
What'd you think about it?
Well, to me, childlike, it was a wonder how that thing went without a horse. Naturally. Yes, it was a wonder. Well, how it went along, chug, 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 we could hear it, and I wondered what in the world was moving that car.
Well, of course you would. A child, especially.
Yeah.
Maybe you wouldn't have to be.
I was 8 or 9.
Maybe you would wonder regardless of age.
Yeah.
You know.
That's true.
I remember I was half afraid of it, and my uncle said, "Oh, it can't hurt you. It won't turn sidewise."
So you moved to Edmond in 1912.
Yes.
Why did you move to Edmond?
I entered the school there in Edmond. There's no high school.
Mm-hmm.
So I was finished with the 8th grade, and I entered Central State. At that time, it was known Central State College instead of Central State University in the
So-
fall of 1912.
So you completed your high school at Central State?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Central State then was known now as a junior college. They gave only 2 years of college work as far as they went. And I stayed until I completed that.
Okay, so you went through high school and your college at Central State?
Yes.
Okay. Where did you live in Shawnee?
I didn't live in Shawnee at all.
I mean Edmond, I'm sorry.
In Edmond.
I'm sorry.
We lived at, I believe it was, we lived on Edward Street. It was about 4 blocks from the college, west there.
How large was the college in 1912?
How about?
How large was the college in 1912?
I think we had, I believe in the summertime, when others came in, there were about 2,300 by the time I finished there. But the average enrollment during the year would not run that much. I would assume around 1,800, something like that.
How big was Edmond when you moved there?
I don't know the population, but it did not cover many miles. The cemetery on the north was the limit, and on the south it was only a very few blocks. It was a small place, quite small compared to what it is now.
Who was the head of the college when you went there?
Dr. Charles Evans.
Charles Evans.
Mhm.
Can you describe him? What kind of
Yes.
man was he?
He was a man who was a booster. When he thought a thing was right, he was willing to fight for it. And he built that school. He was enthusiastic, and he really worked for the good of the school.
Can you give me a physical description? What kind of personality did he have?
He was an average-sized man, had a good-sized voice, and considerable drive. He was a person whom all of us respected. And everything that he said was boosting that school. That's when he was a builder. He retired and came to Oklahoma City the last I heard of it, and I think lived here until his death, Dr. Charles Evans. He came to Edmond from Ardmore, where he was the superintendent of schools in Ardmore.
Did your family take in any boarders in Edmond?
No.
Because I know a lot of people had boarders that lived there while they were going to school.
During the summertime, we did have a few during the summertime, but during the winter, no.
Okay. What kind of fashions what kind of dresses did the women wear to college in 1912?
Well, they did not wear slacks. That was long before the time of slacks. Otherwise, they were dresses according to what style there was at that time. Styles varied, of course.
What was the style in 1912?
I don't know that I can tell you. I don't know that I remember it.
Ever wear a hobble skirt?
Yes. Yes,
Why
and
do
they came in
call
later.
it a hobble skirt?
Because, you know about a hobble skirt,
Oh,
don't you,
yes,
Pepper?
I wore them.
How they call them hobble because they were so narrow that you couldn't take a long step in it. You had to walk as if you were hobbled. Your steps were limited. That's the very reason they were called hobble skirts.
Well, why did that become popular?
Oh, somebody's idea. It was a fad. We have them now. Fashions change.
Of course, you had to buy something new, of course.
It's promotion, largely. They change styles for promoting a different things, you know. And you can't wear last year's style and be stylish this year. There's method in the madness.
While you were going to Central State, what was your favorite style of clothes? Your favorite dress?
Oh, well, I think my favorite was a blue serge dress.
How long was the skirt?
About mid-calf. They weren't so short as they became later.
Mm-hmm. World War I. Did you do any work for the war effort?
No, I didn't.
Were you still in Edmond at that
No.
time?
No. I was out of Edmond before then.
Where were you living then?
Well, let's see, World War I began in 1918, didn't it?
17.
1917.
That's when we entered the war.
We entered in 17.
Right.
At the beginning of the war, I was in Piedmont. I taught my first 2 years, 16 and 17, in Piedmont, right out here. And the next 2 years, I went back to Stonewall, back to the place I was born, taught 2 years there.
Do you remember Armistice Day?
Yes, I do.
Were you in Stonewall?
Yes. I will remember Armistice Day.
What did you do? What did you tell the kids that day?
Well, naturally, we told them that the war was over and this was a peaceful place. And we hoped that it had been successful and that it's still a good place. America is a still fine place in which to live.
Did you have a big celebration at the school?
No, I can remember that we did.
Yeah. What was the name of the school at Stonewall where you taught?
It was just called Stonewall
The
School,
Stonewall School.
Stonewall High School.
And which grades did you teach?
I was in the 9th grade, taught the 9th grade and 10th grade.
Who was your best student at Stonewall?
The best student.
Or your favorite student?
Oh, I don't remember that there were any favorite students. We had some whose people had been there a long, long time. There were the Walkers, who were of the Indian blood. The Walker children were in school at the time. You know, mister, that's been a long time ago.
Yes, it is. A long time ago. The 1920s. Where were you teaching after Stonewall?
After Stonewall, I went back to the little town of Newalla and stayed 2 years teaching. And I went from there then I left there in 1922, went back to Edmond and finished for a degree in 23. And in the fall of 23, and in 22 I was in Edmond. In the fall of 23, I entered the Oklahoma City schools.
Let me regress. When you first went to Edmond, who was your favorite teacher at Central State? Or professor, I should say.
I think my favorite professor was a man who was the geometry teacher. I guess it was because I hated geometry so and had had so much trouble with it until he came. And his name was Sewell.
What was his first name?
I don't know. I don't remember.
What impressed you about him?
He was kind. He was careful to explain. I think was the thing that impressed me most.
Were you a flapper?
No, not really.
What is a flapper?
I consider a flapper as more or less a person who is quite socially minded, friendly, paid a great deal of attention to her dressing.
How did they dress?
A great many of them wore skirts and blouses at that time. Pleated skirt and a blouse.
How short were the skirts?
And not really shorter, much, as I remembered.
Did any of them wear slacks?
No.
Okay.
Slacks were unknown.
Where does the word flapper come from?
I don't know. I don't know.
How did the Depression affect you? 1930s?
Not so badly as it did a great many people. I was teaching here in the Oklahoma City schools. Of course, we had the misfortune to have our salaries reduced somewhat instead of increased as we had hoped for. But I do remember, I drove clear across town. We lived over on East 10th, and I taught in Capitol Hill. I remember driving across town at the river bridge, the banks of that bridge, a soup line had been established. And I still have the picture of those poor people who, with their buckets, were coming to the soup line. And I wish so many times, well, I hope that we'll never see that time again, when we have established soup lines as we had then. As far as it affecting us, it didn't do too much.
Who sponsored the soup lines?
I don't know whether it was Red Cross or not. I don't know. I rather believe it was.
Yeah. Were you aware of any of the WPA or CCC projects going on
Yes.
around Oklahoma City?
The WPA did a great deal of construction out around Spring Lake. I remember that particularly. They were there for some time and did some construction work and building work at Spring Lake. That was made work.
What did they do at Spring Lake? What did they build?
Well, there were benches that I remember of, and I believe there's one building, if I remember rightly, that they constructed out there.
What is the difference between the WPA and CCC?
I don't know. I think the WPA was organized merely for work during that Depression time. Now, if I remember the CCC, that is an organization that has gone, that went, quite a little bit longer than that. I don't know the exact difference in them.
What were you teaching in Oklahoma City?
I taught penmanship a long time, and for the most part I taught English in high school and junior high school.
In World War II, did you have any trouble keeping your students from joining the Army? Your high school students? Or were they too young?
For the most part, I think they were too young. We had some who did join, and then we had later, after the war, some come back. They would come back for a test, what they called the GED program, whereby they would take a test, and if they qualified for a high school diploma, they were given that. That was the result of the war.
Yeah. From the first year you taught, how has teaching methods changed?
Considerably. I don't know what they are now. I've been out of the schools 20 years. But they changed from the old time of textbook and memorization and actually getting down for some basic facts and learning until the idea came in education, let the child think for himself. And the other slogan was, don't stifle the personality of the child. Well, it seems to me that that led somewhat to a more free, careless type of thing. And personally, I feel it was misinterpreted to a great extent. And I feel sometimes we got too slack about it. That they come out not being able to do very much. That's just my personal opinion. But I believe it. In order for a child to think, he has to have a basis with which to think. And that basis comes from facts that he's been taught.
What about changes in punishing students?
I rather like that. I don't like the idea of whipping at all. I don't think it's necessary. I think there are other means of controlling a child other than that. Mm-hmm. I do believe the child needs a firm hand, though. Mm-hmm. He needs to be taught disciplines.
I'd like to get into your teaching methods, how you taught your students, if you can describe those.
Well, now that would be a little bit hard to do. It depends on the group. Mm-hmm. If you have a group of students who are somewhat slow learners, you use drill. They can get a few facts drilled into them. If you have a group who are fast learners, they go beyond the drill. They go into the reason why. And it depends so much upon the students you have, how much they can do. I think each student should be challenged to do his best, but that varies. And the way you go about it would depend upon the group you have. Mm-hmm. If you have a group of high-class students, that is, above normal in thinking, they can do a great deal of organizing and planning for themselves. If you have a group who are inclined to let the other fellow do his thinking, he has to have drill to get the basic facts. It would depend largely on that.
Yeah.
Is that the idea that you wished?
Yes, ma'am. When you first started the school, was it a one-room schoolhouse?
It was a one-room schoolhouse.
How many grades were in the one room?
8. 1 to 8.
How did the teacher
Typical.
teach 8 grades?
Well, at that time we had what they call a recitation bench. He'd call a class, there might be 3 or 4 or 5 in the class at a time. They'd read. He'd teach them reading. The rest of us were to work while he taught them. He did that. We did it that way largely.
Did the older students help the younger students?
Yes. Yes, they did.
How many students were in your school? The one-room schoolhouse?
Oh, I believe there were less than 50. Mm-hmm. if I remember rightly.
And this was at Newalla, the Halifax school.
Well, it began as Halifax School, and of course, when the railroad went through about 1904, it was renamed and the town was moved down close to the depot and it was called Newalla. I understand it's an Indian name and I do not know the meaning of the word, but it was given by the people who established the railroad.
Right. Well, oh, do you remember the Depression of 1907?
Not really. I don't. It didn't affect me much.
Mm-hmm. Well, what else can we talk about?
Well, I might say this. For a person who's lived as long as some of us have, we have seen almost a changed world. There were, in the earlier times, there were no telephones, there were no automobiles. You're depending too much on machines. I think there might be a danger there. We don't depend on our minds. After all, the computer was a product of a human brain. And we don't want to lose that by depending too much on them.
True. When man first landed on the moon, how'd you feel? From the Wright brothers?
Well, it was awesome in a way. What are we coming to? How much are we gaining? How much we have not known all this time, and it's been around us all the time. We had that feeling. What's in the future for us now?
Because you
And it
didn't.
still is a wonder.
That's true.
It still is a wonder. We have seen so many wonderful things happen that I think the world's going on. I think we're going to see more. And I have the attitude we're going to put on our rose-colored glasses and see what does happen in the future.
Maybe. Well, I think we have a good interview. Anything you would like to tell the students of today? Or the teachers of today?
Well, I think I would like to say to these students, time is valuable. And a brain is too valuable a thing to waste. Get what you can. And be dependable. When you get a job, stay with it. Do give it your best. There are still wonderful opportunities ahead. And I believe that firmly.
Well, Miss Lewis, I want to thank you.
Well, you're quite welcome. I don't know that I helped you any at all, but the run was several years before my time, but I quite often remember the story that my mother told of the run. My parents lived near Purcell, on the other side of the Canadian River. That was the limit between Indian Territory and Oklahoma. And she said he would not put his horses into the run because he was afraid that he might get the horse hurt. He rode a mule. They got to the Canadian River and the mule wouldn't take the water. And his partner reached across the hips of the mule and shot a gun, and that shot the mule into the water. And they came across that very way. They came out as far as just south of Moore, and then he staked a piece of land. He later found out that the land was school land, and he could not improve on that, of course. And my mother so often said she was glad. She did not want to come to Oklahoma because it looked so bare and so strange to her. That was the idea of the run. That was the way they came. They came horseback largely. And when the gun was shot at high noon, she had described how the train, the Santa Fe, came through there, and the people were just poured off those coaches to get ready for that run.
Did your father tell you exactly what it was like to be lined up?
No. I was only 3 and a half when my father died, so I would not remember it.
Okay. Yeah.
What I remember is the story that she told us. I
Okay.
would not know it.
Well, thank you.
You're quite welcome.